Indian industry has seen a lot of changes in the last decade. And some of these changes have impacted in a major way on the labor force of this industry. And this was a change for which the labor force was not prepared. But anyway, just to look at and understand what some of these changes were, which have gradually impacted and at times rather sharply impacted on the labor force and employment relations. First of all, the fact is that the education levels of our labor force has gone up gradually over the years. Of recent, you have younger, more educated, more qualified labor entering the marketplace. Alongside, post 1991-92 onwards, after liberalization began, Indian industry had to face competition from industry abroad and work on issues of how to become more competitive. As always, initially, possibly Indian industry's first reaction was to think of labor cost reductions, how to reduce the cost of labor. But it soon became very aware, and this particularly so possibly after 95, 96, that labor cost was really not the major factor that would make them competitive. Because Indian industry, labor costs have not been particularly high. What was high were costs, or what we would particularly refer to as manufacturing costs, operating costs. These costs were never seriously attended to by Indian industry. These costs were in many ways hidden costs because of operating in a seller's market. They had their way, they could sell what they wanted, they could sell which quality they wanted. There was really no worry about manufacturing or operating costs. These costs, Indian industry has begun to look at much more seriously today. But in the process, related to these costs are also of how you work and function on the shop floor, how you manage your industry processes, your production processes, things which neither management to junior management, supervisory level management, or workers had ever looked at seriously, and unions had hardly ever been educated about it. And when these costs and issues relating around them became the center of attention, it involved changing work practices. It involved issues of remanning. It involved issues of shifting people from one shift to another shift. It involved shifting people from one part of an operation to another operation. It involved making people amenable to multi-skilling and to accept multi-skilling, something which they had never traditionally done or accepted. All these became major issues of impact on the labor force. What the public outside, or what most of us as lay people see or are aware of, are only issues of downsizing or the exit of people, the insistence of reducing the numbers, but that is only a part of the whole process. A much greater process has taken place within shop floors. A related issue was that Indian industry had never quite educated either the employee force, that is the labor force, or its supervisory cadre and its junior management about the market and the consequences of changes in the market for any production process. Manufacturing sectors had to have a very hard look at the quality of recruitment they do. Why are they doing recruitment? Is there really work required on the shop floor? These issues took the labor force by surprise because they'd got used to easy entry into industry earlier. And today, with downsizing, much more careful selection and recruitment of people into the workforce, there's been a clear slowdown. And for much of the labor force, those who are coming onto the labor force, this has been a bit of a shock, that employment is not easily available. To take an example, there is a factory which I got to know fairly closely, an industrial unit in North UP, located near the Nepal border in the Bareilly area. This factory produces polyester film. Polyester film, which is used for various kinds of uses, from audiovisual tapes to X-ray films to food packaging. In the 90s, particularly towards the mid-90s, this firm was able to get and acquire an export market. And much of the produce, about 40%, I'm told, was exported to Western countries, including countries like Germany, United States, and also a part, I'm told, to Asia, South Asia. Now, one of the things the workers had never been educated about was as to how important and how uncompromising the rigor had to be about the quality of what was made. This took a lot of time being put across to employees to make them aware that quality was not just an issue of an inspector standing at one end of the line and checking quality, or the laboratory technician checking the quality in samples taken from the shop, but that employees down on the shop floor had to be ruthlessly rigorous about quality and making sure that dust particles, that any kind of foreign item matter did not get into the polyester film, because this immediately would lead to extensive rejects at the landed site abroad, and which would finish the entire stock and have that stock sent back to the company. Now, this also meant that workers had to be educated, workers had to be retrained, and workers, essentially the issue was of tackling mindsets of workers, and also of supervisory cadre, and even of junior management, who probably had never thought about such issues before. Another kind of issue which also began to affect workers was that the induction of new levels of technology. And that this induction of new levels of technology took place at a fairly faster pace than they'd ever witnessed in the decades before. Invariably earlier, technology induction and changes had been a kind of matter of discussion between maybe unions and management, and often delayed, procrastinations would take place. But this time they found that if they wanted to retain their jobs, if they wanted the organizations they were working in to stay competitive, they had to accept new technologies. Another factor which has affected the employment scene, which has affected our labor force in this country, has been the clear decline in employment in the manufacturing sector. Another set of changes that have affected workers is that organizations have desired much greater flexibility from their employees. Flexibility in the kind of production processes that exist, in having much quicker, shorter downtime when changes have to take place in production processes, much quicker, shorter downtime for maintenance. All this requires far greater speed from the workers and from the supervisory cadre as well as junior management cadre. It also requires the junior management plan the work much better, explain things to the supervisors as well as the workers. These are things which have taken our workforce again by surprise in many cases, because these were not the kind of work practices they were used to. Employees need to be involved seriously in the dialogue and discussion about changes and how to improve work practices, work processes, ensure standardization of quality, and ensure continuous upgradation of quality. This was not done seriously by Indian industry. Even today, it's not adequately done. But at least today, where it is done, it is a serious process. And this is a big change, because again, workers were not prepared for this. Even supervisory cadre were not prepared for it. This requires homework from all levels of management. It requires homework even from supervisory cadre, and that supervisory cadre prepare workers to participate in such serious shop floor discussion and dialogue. It is as a result of this that today, where industries are fairly young, or units are fairly young, and technology processes are relatively newer, and even workforces are younger, clearly today, in such units and situations, workers are demanding technology training and technology training for upgradation of skills, which has not been a major demand before. But this is again another change that workers are facing and their response to this has been that they need to be trained, they need to be educated. Another lesson for our workforce, an issue which has had impact on them, is the realization that it is your skill that is going to keep you in employment, and that it is the value addition to the skills you have that ensures the security of employment. This is a lesson or an understanding which Indian labor force in industries where changes have been taking place, in such places workers have begun to perceive this. It has caused apprehension, it has caused anxiety, but those who've been able to understand it and that this is part of the changes taking place worldwide have responded by trying to upgrade their own skills, either through additional programs, diplomas outside, or by seeking knowledge from ensuring that the management gives them such programs and training internally. But this is a major, major learning for our workforce, something which they were not at all exposed to earlier. The issue that it is your skill, the quality of your skill, and the value you bring to your skills that ensures your employment, and that industry is not going to work on the traditional terms that once in, you're there permanently. Another part of this change has been that workers today are increasingly becoming ambitious of moving up from worker ranks into supervisory ranks and into managerial ranks. A question that is often asked is that, is there a nexus or a relationship between the quality of work, the quality of output, and the protection of employment or protection available to employment of a labor force? To my mind, there's a clear relationship. I will give you two kinds of examples. Let us take one example which all of us are very well aware of. The Ambassador car. The Ambassador car is a very sturdy car, but in terms of technology and technological advancement in automobile technology, it's a car which over 30 years and 40 years, 50 years has remained unchanged. While it may have met the kind of requirements of the Indian market, Indian road conditions, as competitors entered the market, gradually the market of the Ambassador car declined and has finally declined very sharply. To this extent that a small family or anyone seeking to purchase a car for personal use is most unlikely to go out and buy an Ambassador car. Now, what are the consequences of this decision for the labor who are employed with the manufacture of that car? From newspaper reports and whatever little that I've been able to read up, I think something like over 5,000 people lost employment. Now, the failure of an organization, of an industry and a management to upgrade technology to ensure quality has led finally, maybe over a long period, but it has finally led to serious downsizing, severe downsizing, not serious, severe downsizing of the labor force. And when the same ownership decides to go in for a new collaboration to manufacture the Mitsubishi, they do not set up that manufacturing facility at the Hindustan Motors Rishabh plant, but they decide to set it up at an entirely different location with far tighter manning and an entirely new range of technology for manufacturing and assembling that car. Take another example of how employment and quality of production are related, and the quality of output of what you do. More than 15-20 years ago, a small company was set up in the backyards of Madras called TVS Sundaram Fasteners, which is part of the TVS group. In the late 80s, probably when no one even knew much about, in India at least, about or were worried about productivity qualities and persistently achieving quality standards, Sundaram Fasteners approached the Japanese and I'm told had a study conducted at their small plant in Madras on how to improve quality standards and make them more world-class to begin with. And this company, which hardly anyone knew of, became the first Indian company to get the ISO 9000. This company became a major manufacturer and player in radiator caps for car radiators. Initially, it was very slow going for them. But first, possibly it was General Motors, and later it has been Mercedes. They have won acclaim and contracts with both General Motors and Mercedes. If I'm not wrong, as I understand the situation today, they are probably the sole suppliers of radiator caps for General Motor cars throughout the world at every unit of General Motors across the globe. Similarly for Mercedes. Now, how did they achieve such standards that these two giants in automobile industry and manufacture globally could accept an Indian company? They did it and were accepted because of the quality standards they achieved. At one time, they had the accepted defect rate for 1 million pieces of radiator caps was 60 pieces in 1 million. This company, Sundaram Fasteners, finally achieved 0 defect in 1 million pieces. Now, that is quality standards. Now, with those quality standards have gone the protection of the labor, the employment of protection of employment, as well as gradual but slow growth in employment in the factory at Sundaram Fasteners. An aspect that we would have to accept as we progress into this coming decade is that employment potential in the manufacturing sector may not expand much or grow much. Employment is going to grow largely in the service sector. There's a whole area in the service sector where all kinds of new opportunities are coming up. It's not just the IT industry and the computer related world. There are a whole host of services which are coming up, which are happening. It's happening in a small way. But possibly one of the drawbacks is that those who come onto the labor market are not being educated in terms of the kind of opportunities they need to look for. Possibly as a nation, at the larger level of the economy, we are still preoccupied or fixed with the notion that employment means having a job in a factory or having a job in an office, and that to 9 to 5. I think what we need to educate ourselves about is that a job is not necessarily 9 to 5. A job can be a place where I work 4 hours and then come back maybe later and take up another 4 hours after a 4-hour break. Or maybe I work at one place for 4 hours and may work somewhere else for 4 hours. This kind of flexibility needs to enter our frameworks and thinking about jobs. That's one part of it. Another part of it, and which is fairly obvious already, is that in the kind of technological changes that have been happening and will continue to happen, a core group of people who have the core skills of a technology will always be essential to a production process, to a manufacturing process, to a particular customer service. But around that core will be a larger group of peripheral people who will be required today and may not be required tomorrow. It can relate to IT, it can relate to computers, it can relate to transportation, it can relate to many kinds and forms of work. It can relate to the hotel industry. But the fact of the matter is that always now, or this is more likely to be the pattern, that there'll be a certain area of work at the core where certain core skills are required, and a certain number of people will have those core skills and will stay in that employment for a longer period of time, whereas around them will be a periphery of people who may be larger in number and who will be employed for shorter phases of time. So what this larger number of people need to prepare themselves for and this is not just at labor force level in terms of workers, but even at level of management and junior management, they need to prepare themselves for upgrading their knowledge, acquiring new skills, so that they are available to work in a new area of work 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. This may seem harsh, but this is the way work is shaping, and this is something which is not going to easily reverse or change. The pace of it may slow down to some extent as the years go by, but that is a matter of debate, and that is something we need to see. So, in a sense, our whole definition of what is secure in an employment, that will have to change. And maybe along with it, we'll also have to change how we write law to protect employment and how we manage people to create security. Security is created also by the way in which people are handled and treated.